Adriano, thank you very much for joining us on the Roundball Australia podcast today. It's a real pleasure to have you in. For those who may not be aware of your history, you're a Melbourne boy. You spent 13 years at Ivanhoe Grammar, which as a Trinity Grammar old boy myself, I know a little bit about. Had some good battles with Ivanhoe on the sporting field. But since then, you've had about a decade, I believe, on TV. You've covered World Cups and Champions League finals and done events for UEFA and FIFA as well. So a very successful career so far, and it's a very warm welcome to you today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Pleasure and a lot of love between the Ivanhoe and Trinity boys, so always respect.
Always respect, absolutely. If you wouldn't mind just kicking us off, telling us a little bit about you and your journey into sport media as well, and your attempts in the early days to cut into the Australian media, and then why you made the decision to look overseas as well.
Look, I'm very, lucky that from a very early age I always knew what I wanted to do. I come from an Italian family, and football was always at the cornerstone of what we loved, and I always knew that I'd love to carve out some sort of career in that space. I mainly played Aussie rules, so I did play football here, but Aussie rules was my main strong sport of choice. But I always had that passion at a deeper level as a fan for football, and I thought, look, if I can work on some sort of media career in that, it could be a nice way to couple the two together. So taking a very strong liking to television, even when I was still in high school, I just made it up as I went, basically, and still, almost 2 decades on to this day in terms of when those dreams were realised in my very early teen years till this day, it's always what I've pursued. So I started very actively in terms of doing some writing in my later years of high school for some publications in the UK mainly, and a lot of work, but very quickly it led to opportunities in that part of the world. And it was at that point that, I guess, with regards to your question of when did I realise, or what was my relation with the opportunities in Australia, I learned that there weren't too many. And particularly back then, there weren't too many avenues for me to make any inroads at the level that I aspired to work at. And so even to this very day, I've done very, very, very little work into Australia. All of my work has really been at an international level, which looks nice on paper, but it has come with a lot of hard work and sacrifice that most will never know and most don't see. So I've been very fortunate, very blessed with the support I've had around me to be able to carve out now, again, many, many years on, to carve out a career where, yes, I've been very lucky to cover, multiple Champions League finals, multiple Champions League seasons, Serie A seasons, World Cups, European Championships, and host some events which I very much dreamt of hosting when I was a kid, and not many have done that on the planet. And the fact I've done that at this early stage of my career, I'm very grateful for, but I did work extremely hard and continuing to do exactly that. So look, always proud to represent everyone who's shown support and love to me along the journey at those highest levels, but still feel I'm at the earlier stages of my career with still a lot more to achieve and a lot more to do. But always remember where I started and the people around me here, especially in Australia where I'm at the moment in Melbourne, that gave me the opportunity to pursue my dreams. And it's something I continue to make up as I go, if I'm being very honest.
I've heard you tell a pretty funny story about using whatever European fixture you were watching in the morning as an excuse for why you were late to school on a particular day.
Spot on.
Just to come so far from that moment, like getting up early to watch those games and being late for school, and then 15 plus years later, being the one at those games and working on that. How do you reflect on the journey? As you say, you've had to put in a lot of hard work to get there, but are those kind of pinch yourself moments that you are there and you're doing those really cool games?
Yeah, look, in the moment, it's very normal for me now. And it's when I come back to Australia and have my mini breaks throughout the season, throughout the year, it's when I actually do reflect. When I'm there, and I'm currently living in Milan, so when I'm there at home and I'm at San Siro every second weekend, or I'm in Spain, France, Germany every other week and covering these big matches, it's very, very normal. It's bizarre in a way how long you work to something, and then once you start doing it, I'm working with a legend of the game every second week. I'm rubbing shoulders with the president of this club and this federation, and it's just very normal. I'm in that world. But then when I come back to where it all began, you do pinch yourself a little bit to think, how did that happen? That was it wasn't too long ago that I was here. I was thinking, how do I make this up? How do I make that happen? So you do. But the professionalism certainly kicks in, that when you're, look, I've been in situations, I have hundreds of stories in situations where if you take a second to think, what on earth am I doing here? It's they're the funnier moments, because there are so many stories to share. But the story you mentioned with regards to me missing school to watch matches and do that, it's where the passion came from. And I think
Yeah.
people always say, if you can work in your passion, you won't work a day in your life. Now, again, there's a lot of hard work that comes with pursuing something in this space. However, I've always pursued it with the utmost belief that I can achieve what I've set out to achieve, because of the fact that I am so passionate about the space. I've had great knowledge in the space, and really with that depth of knowledge and understanding, I've learned a way to carve out a career in the space. So it's funny how it all combines and couples together, that the time and energy I invested in myself in the sport in my teenage years, particularly when I should have been at school, has benefited me now in the long run. So yeah, just a lot of love for the sport, and especially the cultural side of the sport over the journey.
As you alluded to, obviously people kind of just see the finished product of all your work on TV. What is an example of one of those either really hard decisions or the tough moments that you've had to push through to get to where you are?
Yeah, look, the toughest thing is, again, people see not even 1% of the end product, because I always am very transparent in saying my job is not the 1 minute you see live on camera. It's everything else that comes with building and creating a life in that space. Yes, I work in TV, but I don't have a private chauffeur driving me around city to city and just washing my hands when I come out of the boat. It's not like that. It's actually the opposite. And the work that goes into organizing myself logistically, traveling, moving around, and just ensuring that I'm maintaining a really strong balance between my physical, my mental state, my health, my well-being. There's so much that comes into play with just ensuring that you're ready to execute and perform when live for a 5-10 minute window, especially in the heart of winter when it does get very difficult. Sometimes I do 3 games in 3 days in 3 different cities. It's a lot of travel. It's not fun. So the pictures and you're traveling over some mountains looks all well and good, but it's very, very challenging. And then you're judged on a 5-minute window of work that's taken you 24 hours to get there. But the biggest challenge, without doubt, is just the sacrifices you make in terms of leaving what is a very comfortable, cruisy, full of love life here in my home city, where I have all of my comforts, especially being people, and consistently moving to the other side of the world to pursue my professional ambitions. And that's something which, again, to be honest, not even my extended family really comprehend how difficult that is, because you can be so connected these days with phones and social media, and you can always be up to date, but you're still connected, because I certainly traveled in the days where social media wasn't what it is today, but you are so disconnected, you are so far out of the loop that it's really you or nothing, and you are there alone to pursue these really high demanding, difficult fields by yourself. And I do have a lot of family in Italy, which is very helpful, but being away from those closest to you here where you come from is something that I can't put any price on, how much I would cherish having that, but how difficult that is to deal with, being without them over there in that environment.
As you mentioned before, you're based in Milan, and obviously that's an area where football is clearly number one. Do you notice anything obvious in Australian football that just screams out to you that could easily be fixed in terms of, reaching out to the game's full potential that we can maximise?
It's a very good question, because the thing which I've always been in love with in football, and have fallen more in love with now, immersing myself in so many different layers of football, so many different levels and divisions and leagues across Europe, is the cultural side. And I think here, again, I don't have the greatest knowledge in Australian football here, especially over the last 10 plus years that I've been away, but not having the cultural side connected to football. Football is not just like any other sport. Melbourne, for what AFL is, for what AFL stands for, it's a sport. It's not a religion. It's not a culture as football is in Europe. And I can say that because I grew up my entire life playing Aussie rules. I know exactly how the industry works. I know exactly how the hardcore fans are and how they think and how they feel. It doesn't compare even an ounce compared to what football is for people from their cities, from their regions and towns in Europe. And I think having some level of cultural connectivity to a club standing for something, having an identity. Obviously, in the most severe of circumstances in Europe, there are still old school political ties, cultural ties to clubs, which don't always result in, not always what we want to see between fans in football, because it does sometimes result in tensions between fans. I'm certainly not calling for that, but certainly having clubs that stand for something, that means something, that connect people in a different way than your everyday life do, I think that's something which we have lost. And obviously we go back to the 90s, different league, different way of football here, but there was a different level of fandom for a reason in Australia. These clubs stood for something, and we still obviously see that now with some of the top NPL clubs. But at A-League level, I think that's what we struggled to establish, because having a certain team from a certain city or a certain region is probably not enough when there are already other sports that I guess attract that sort of attention from fans. I'm from Adelaide, so I'm going to support the Adelaide Crows. Does that mean you support Adelaide United? I'm not sure, but there are cultural ties which we have in Europe, which certainly uncover more fans who are from that region, but then also connect to certain beliefs and ways of life, which I think we need to see to assist the sport to prosper again here in Australia domestically.
And you were back in Australia a couple of years ago doing some work for Optus Sport for the Women's World Cup, which was obviously a huge success over here, booming. Just the popularity just grew over here, which is extraordinary. Could you just explain a bit about your time covering that tournament and just your overall perception of the tournament in general?
That was super cool. It was actually the first ever time in my life I worked on TV in Australia, which was very cool. So, despite everything on paper, it was the first time here. That was a cool experience personally. But no, look, to be a part of that, something very unique. I hopefully not, but I'm very confident that will be the only World Cup we'll ever have on our home turf in my lifetime, and I am very blessed to have been a part of that. I think it was really once in a lifetime, super special time for where the women's game was at. I also did a lot of work with Optus in the lead up to the World Cup with a lot of the girls as well, so just building those relations with some of the players and just following their journeys. And obviously in Europe the women's side of the game is really booming, so just learning a lot more about the women's side of the sport, which I've continued to do in the couple of years since. A really, really refreshing project, I'd say, to be involved with. I think any fan of the men's game may share the belief, but certainly the level of which I work at it, the men's game is changing. There's no doubt about it. I think the women's game offers a sense of it's very tough to find the words, but a real sense
like purity, maybe?
Bravo. Purity. I've used that word before as well. It is. I was going to say rawness, but it's a sense of purity that the men's game has completely lost. And the purity in the women's game, the love of the game, just the willingness, obviously the stage it's at as well, but just the willingness to make it grow, to push forward. It's been really, really cool to play a small part from the small job I have in just assisting with some extra access, some extra attention, some extra publicity. I host some events in the women's game. So that all culminating together to the Women's World Cup in our country, I think I'm going to be very hard to top that for a unique, special experience like that in my career. So super cool to be a part of. And obviously the Matildas doing so well, making the Final Four. Shame, of course, not to go to the final, but what a moment for the sport in this country. And for our girls to have done that, I think it's can only do massive benefit for the sport now going forward, which we're already seeing, of course, in participation rates, which are continually soaring.
Yeah, and you obviously would have seen the news of Optus Sport closing down. And like you said, you've worked for them as well for a few years. So what was your initial reaction to hearing that news? And also, what's the impact on Aussie media? Because we know now the APL rights have gone over to Stan Sport. They've got the Champions League now. Can you just explain a bit about that and the whole Aussie media landscape and how that might impact things?
Well, it wasn't a surprise. I knew it was coming. Just worked with them for a long time, so obviously knew the inside word on what was happening. Obviously a great shame because it was a platform that started back in 2016, 2017, and I was working with them basically from post World Cup 2018. And look, there were so many wonderful people involved with that, particularly from the start, to get it up and running and to build its presence so quickly. And it was a platform that showed it had great potential and great promise, and really delivered, particularly the social numbers and just the ability to connect Aussie football fans. And it was very quickly becoming the home for football in this country. And it's something that obviously since since the emergence of these platforms and since the days of SBS, really the World Game, and when SBS had the Champions League coverage and highlights of all the top leagues around Europe, we've really lacked as a country that one home for football. Fox Sports, of course, had a very nice window in the 2010s where they had the Premier League and the A-League, and certainly it was a very, very positive movement there for football. But Optus was suddenly becoming what looked to become the new home. We felt internally perhaps there was only one big rights deal away from having 2 or 3 really top leagues and becoming that real presence again. So it's a shame to see what's happened in the post Women's World Cup the last couple of years. Obviously they've continued doing good work, but the rights haven't come in. But now I think it does. You turn the page and there is an exciting chapter ahead, because I think with Stan now involved, and again a network I've done some work with, but I think with Stan involved it does provide now a really interesting opportunity, because unlike Optus, Stan are backed by a network. Already we've seen some of the Champions League matches, especially the Champions League final, live on the free-to-air. Now with the Premier League, with the Champions League, with some cup competitions, I would be very confident in saying their portfolio may only grow from there. And if their investment in football can continue, well, we could start to see football at least condensed to 1 or 2 homes as opposed to at the moment. Obviously, there's, from what I understand in Australia, there's football a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit everywhere.
Yeah.
So, look, it could be a really interesting moment for this next page of football in the country. And who knows, I'm not quite sure on what exactly their plans are, but Champions League and Premier League, without question, are the 2 biggest club European football properties in Australia in terms of attention. So, look, it's a really good start, good package for them to have, and I'm sure they'll do a very, very good job with it, given the great people that I know they have involved there as well.
I'm really interested in your insight as someone who obviously has a very deep connection to Australia, but has been living in Europe for a fair while now, on what the levels of respect or the consideration of Australian football in the last few years. Because we've sat here pretty much since probably the men's and the women's previous World Cups in 22 and 23. We've seen Ange Postecoglou and Joe Montemuro do really good things in the coaching space. We've seen record numbers of young Australians earning transfers over to Europe as well. It feels like, from our perspective, that respect for Australian football talent is growing. Is that something that you felt as well living over in Europe?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Look, it's not a straight yes, because the harsh reality is we are a very, very, very small country on the other side of the world, and I have many people I know in the game who are Australian who have done some wonderful things across all levels. So it's not that the respect isn't there. I wouldn't be so sure to go out on a limb and say that we're a respected football nation globally. Yes, we've done well at different levels of the game in World Cups and whatnot. Obviously, we did exceptionally well in the Qatar World Cup, pushing Argentina all the way. It was still amazing, but I don't think that has necessarily translated to, okay, we're a really serious player in this game. I mean, the most recent, very exciting youngster, Iran Kunda, who made the move to Bayern, and now obviously he's moved from there for now, but didn't really garner any significant attention despite the quality, despite all of the highlights coming out of home across the continent. And I can be very honest in saying I've also experienced that in my work and still do. Again, it's crazy because, and they also, event organisers tell me this all the time. They're like, we're sorry for this, we know you, but Australia, you're Australian, it's still like, are you really football players? And that's even from a broadcast side. I can tell you many stories where I've had stories of people want to just have a informal phone call with me just to test my accent before they appoint me to be an event host of a big event. So, look, in the English-speaking English game, it's all about English and British, and that's in my world. In the football side of things, I think from, let's just say, lesser major football markets, there is a really strong, a lot of attention towards the US at the moment. So Australia, despite being 10 times smaller population, we're probably in that bracket in terms of foreign markets producing foreign players who may have some potential. But I think if we go back to, with respect to our golden generation in the 2000s, if we were producing that level of talent, then we would be putting ourselves back on the map from a male perspective. I think from a female perspective, we definitely do have the respect. There's no question. We host a fantastic World Cup. We have top players playing at top clubs. We have some of the best players in the world, the best players in the world, and some good young players coming through. But the men's game, I don't think really the last generation, with respect to all our players, has really put a dent in putting Australia on the map, at least in a European sense at this point. But who knows? 12 months from now in the US, let's see what happens, and hopefully another big step forward.
A very interesting response. I wonder, what's your relationship with the A-League as well? Because you obviously would have only been around in the country for the kind of beginning of it. Do you keep in touch in, not necessarily the games or anything, but just in terms of how that relationship with Australian football is going?
With exception to a few individuals, not much. I know people who are very high up in the A-League. Obviously, some of the top coaches and players I know very well. So outside of those individual connections, not so much. I'm always curious about just the relations between all involved and how best to push the domestic league with its relationship with the league itself, with the federation, with the broad, especially for me with the broadcast side. What's the best way to continue to push and grow the product as a product, as a brand? How do you continually grow? How do you continually draw in new fans? And I think coming from a broadcast perspective, that's always my largest area of interest, because I think one thing we could do a little stronger in terms of coverage of particularly our national team players. We only tend to cover our national team and its players when the teams play. So if the Socceroos are playing every 2 months and Matildas play every 2 months, that's when you'll see a little bit of news come in. But particularly at the moment in the women's game, we have 4 or 5 players, some signed, some I can't say yet but are about to, at top clubs in top leagues in Europe. That should be big news. Not that just we hear about that every 8 weeks when the teams come to a camp and what's up, what's been happening. There are some really big stories of big players doing big things at big clubs. And I think that deserves more attention, because I think by doing that, we would see more of a buy-in from the part-time football fan. Because I think full-time football fans like yourselves will always be across what's happening. But it's about the sport fan in Australia, of which everyone basically is a sports fan. Let's captivate them and keep them in touch with our players, and let's keep them in touch with the storylines while there isn't an international window. And then maybe that means that they watch a little bit more of the A-League, or they watch a little bit more of our players when they're playing at their clubs in Europe. And that way we maintain that connection between player, storyline, and the national teams and the fan. And I think that's something that, again, collectively we can improve in. And so I guess with regards to your question, that's what I'm always keeping an eye on from the league. What stories are being told? What reason are they giving new fans to want to buy in and to support these clubs? Because the old fans will always be there, but how do we continue to grow, and what's the strategy to do that? But I probably don't know enough about the domestic game, having not followed it closely enough from where I've been to have the answer. But yeah, from a broadcast sense, across the board, I think we can do a little more.
Interesting. So let me ask a broadcast question then. So when we learnt that the Premier League was going across to Stan, basically what we've got in Australia now is some of the major European club football competitions, as you say, the Premier League and the Champions League all together on one platform. And this is taking Stan and Foxtel out of it, just the groups of competitions. And then on the other hand, you have all the other major Australian codes, so your AFL, your NRL, and your cricket.
Yep.
And the discussion that we were having at the time is, what is the more value pool for the A-League to be involved with? Is it better to be seen alongside those other more general, typical Australian codes? Or would it be better for the competition to be packaged with all of that European football, kind of like the days of the Foxtel about a decade ago? Well, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, look, I think you could make a case for either. Obviously, it's natural to say that the local sports will have more eyeballs on it. But will those eyeballs directly translate to the A-League? Or are we better off targeting the already football fans who may just be watching European football, who would be more inclined to watch and support the domestic competition? Look, I think if you had to pick one, I would definitely pick the football platform. I think there's no doubt, because there are already fans there, there are already football fans there, and I also think that knowing a bit about what Stan and Nine are doing, they do have a very strong sport portfolio and they're looking to continue to grow that. So I'm not saying that's going to mean AFL and NRL comes that way in future, but if they are dedicating themselves, and there are some really good people involved there, I think they will do a great service to a potential A-League down the track. And so I think that also needs to be kept in mind. If the AFL broadcaster picks up the A-League, what level of care will they give the A-League? That would be the question. So it's not about just having more eyeballs on that because they have AFL and NRL, but what service will they give to that competition? Whereas Nine and Stan already invested in football, already with great football people, with great minds working behind the scenes, I think they'd give a much, much, much better service to something they were already working on, particularly if that something was then domestic football and they could actually be a lot more hands-on with its growth. So I think no question for me that I would put that on the already football broadcaster.